Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenegar, and this is the Eddy Network, a global conversation for local leaders. Today, I'm privileged to have my son, Troop, join us. Troop has just published his first book. It's a novel called Victory Ruins, and it's very good. I really have enjoyed this. And it's a story about a young man from a family farm in Piedmont region of North Carolina, and it begins at the just before the start of the Second World War, and this young man ends up going to fight on the Allied side in Europe, and the story of the war is the story of the family farm. It's the story of this young man. I think it's really well done, and I'm particularly pleased with the characters that he's created. You know, they're very real and three-dimensional characters. So we're going to talk about this today. We're going to also talk about the larger scope of what he's interested in. We talk about history and family and the world at large. And I think you'll find it quite interesting. It's the sort of thing that Tripp and I and his brother and his sister have these kinds of conversations quite regularly. So I hope you will enjoy it. And if you would sign up for my Substack so that you can make sure that you get the written version of it and this podcast version of it. It's also available on YouTube, and in the new year, it'll be available on other sites as we actually do a formal launch of the Eddy Network podcast. So I'm glad you're with us today. I hope that you will find this interesting and worthwhile, and share it with people that you know. And so, as much as anything, to be able to generate conversation between you and them as we talk about these important issues in our world. So thank you. Well, welcome, Troop. I'm glad to have you on the podcast. And this is exciting for me as your father. It's exciting for me because of what you have accomplished, this new book that you've written, and the story you're telling. And it's I know it's been a long time coming. And so congratulations, and I'm proud of you. But
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
I really want the people who are watching and who are listening to grasp that the larger picture of what this book is about and what your interest is. And I mean, we could talk just like we always talk, on the phone, or whenever we're together. These long conversations we have about lots of different things. So welcome. So why don't we just start with how did you come to decide that you wanted to be a writer?
It was definitely a long kind of process of development. I don't know if there was any one moment where I made the decision like, oh, this is going to be my life's work. I just always enjoyed reading, and out of the joy of reading came the desire to tell my own stories. Growing up, I read just absolutely everything I could lay my hands on. I was homeschooled, so I had a lot of spare time on my hands. Finished my schoolwork early. I wasn't outside just wandering around in the woods. I was reading. We had an old set of World Book encyclopedias, and when I had read everything else in the house, I would sometimes, in a fit of boredom, just pick up the encyclopedia and just start reading. And I checked out everything I could out of the library, every book on the war between the states, the Civil War that I could. A lot of spy novels and thrillers, and many of them of dubious quality. And when I was probably 13 or 14, I just started wanting to write things on my own, tell my own stories. I had a lot of crazy stories running around in my head. And so I wrote a book that was we'll say an alternative history novel where Joseph Stalin is responsible for the Second World War. Hitler is not on the scene. And that is about as good a quality of a book as you could imagine a 14-year-old Could have written. It's certainly not of the. I was certainly no
Yeah,
child prodigy, like a lot of the.
I have a
The
copy of
day.
it somewhere. I have a bound copy and somewhere because
Yeah, I was no Cyril Connolly or anything like that. Some sort of boy genius. No Kipling, for sure. It's pretty bad. It's pretty rough. So it's stuffed away in a drawer somewhere.
well,
It's gonna stay there.
what I remember from those years. I mean, this is the mid '90s, and so at that point in time, we had one computer in the family, and so you asked us for your own computer. So your mother and I found you a used computer and we bought you that. And I remember you spending 2 to 3 hours every day in front of that computer writing.
Yeah.
And what impressed me about that was two things. One was the storyline that you had created for this alternative history, and the second was that your real purpose was to learn how to write battle scenes and to write dialogue. I don't know if you remember that, but
No, I don't remember.
huh?
I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
Well, I do because that was one of the reasons you gave us for wanting your own computer, and so and it's taken what almost 25 years to kind of bear the fruit of that. So
Yeah,
I'm
in
joking
some ways.
somewhat, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think we saw then that you were a person who was thoughtful and in not a conventional way, but you were looking at things at a pretty deep level, and you were seeking to understand things, even as a early adolescent, and therefore writing would become a vehicle for you to understand the world.
Certainly, I'm the total opposite of Hemingway. Hemingway was absolutely terrified of the blank page. I've never had an issue with looking at a blank page. It's always much more a case of, well, how am I going to make everything fit? It's always about, I guess when I approach a project, I more or less have the whole thing kind of mapped out in my head, or I at least have kind of the running theme, the whole catch to it, and I know how to build everything around it. And then I want to throw so many things in and have so many overt and also implied elements to it that the difficulty becomes, making it cohesive and really making it melt.
So, how many drafts of this new book did you go through?
I looked at this the other day, and it looks like 6 or 7, minus, and then obviously probably a dozen, drafts for just proofing and things like that. But in terms of major changes and revisions, about 6 or 7, and it got really big and bloated at one point, and I finally kind of winnowed it down to something much more manageable. Like you said, I had wanted to write battle scenes and dialogue, and that probably came through in this, in a lot of those early drafts. A lot more battle scenes, a lot more of the. So in the book, a lot more of the middle scenes of the book are having to do with the character at war. And
What do you mean by the character of war?
The character is at war.
Character of the protagonist is at war.
Yeah, he's off at war.
Well, why don't you give us a little synopsis of the book, and then we can delve into
right. So the novel obviously is Victory Ruins. It is about a young man, Harlan Breckenridge, who is from North Carolina. He grows up on a small family farm. He's the last male in the family, and it's the end of the Great Depression, 1940, when the book starts. and he is expecting to take over the family farm and continue on in the way that his family always has. He's a little bit younger than his older sisters, and so he got, and being the only male, he kind of got all the male attention and the instruction from his father. So he very much wants to live in the way that they have always lived. He's kind of an old soul, kind of a man out of time. But here comes the Second World War.
What does that way look like? What is that way, that old way of life? What does that look like for? And his name is Arlen, right?
Arlen, yeah.
What does that look like to Arlen?
So his family has been on this land for generations and generations. It's a small family farm. It is largely self-sufficient in the sense that when you talk about self-sufficiency, I think that people have the idea of subsistence farming, that you are only, the only thing that you have is what you grow. Historically speaking, it wasn't quite like that. You would grow a lot of your own food. In fact, probably most of it. Whatever you had as a surplus, you would sell, and you would maybe grow certain things that you could get for more cash. In the context of the American South, it would be things like cotton or tobacco, particularly cotton, because even if you were primarily focused on raising your own grains and your own livestock and having a large garden, preserving your own foods, you would want to grow, you might grow a couple acres of cotton because you could store that. And the cotton would keep for a long time. If the cotton market wasn't doing well, you weren't getting the price that you wanted on a bale of cotton, you could store it up and you could wait until later. So it was kind of like having cash.
Hard asset. It was a hard asset.
Yeah, it was like having cash in the bank. Maybe do a little mule trading. Certainly, and in some parts, if you had the knowledge, make some whiskey, do a little trade in whiskey.
Yeah.
Yep. So it is self-sufficient, but it's also interdependent. It's very much dependent upon the community of people around you, because what you have somebody else might not have, or what you don't have somebody else might have. And frequently that is material goods, but it's also cash. So rather than paying for labor, you would end up swapping labor with somebody else. You might trade a certain number of days labor to somebody in exchange for either material goods or a certain number of days labor in return. And this is all well established historically. I mean, this is, if you go back and you do a lot of digging into history, local histories, social histories, regional histories, this is very much the picture that emerges for certainly Southerners, certainly rural Americans of all kinds. And if you go back to far enough in American history, it probably was the reality in one way or another for 90% of the population. So that's the kind of world that he lived in. And what's really interesting about the county I decided to set as Arlen's world that he grows up in, it is Catawba County, North Carolina. And I sort of, through various ways, stumbled across it in doing a lot of research. And I found that there was a lot of great history and documentation written about it. And it's the picture that emerges when you read these histories is that it is the county itself, its history is a microcosm of America, in that settling of the frontier, the emergence of a very tight-knit rural community where there's sort of a social bond balanced with individualism, And then in the latter half of the 19th century, the 1800s, that rural world starts to get pulled more and more into industrial capitalism, and then industrialism really takes over, and that's where we see Arlen ending, right? So they're sort of the last of the last. They're holding on and they're holding out to their way that they've always known. It's a way that gives them meaning. It's a way that gives them connection to what they have been, connection to the future. It grounds them in terms of who they are, but it takes a lot of cunning and intelligence in that day and age to maintain that traditional way of life, far more so than previous generations would have needed in order to maintain it.
Well, that area of North Carolina, and it would be considered sort of the upper Piedmont.
Yeah, the Western Piedmont. Yeah.
Western Piedmont would have had a lot of knitting mills, hosiery mills, and furniture factories that developed there. You know, that was a real seed of industry, and
Yeah.
those were places when, 40 years ago we began to send all our manufacturing jobs overseas. Those were the communities that suffered from that sort of action. I actually worked with one of those hosiery mills in 2000. I was on a team that was addressing their the decline in their business, and they were probably classic hosiery mill. They were going to make socks. That's what they did. That's what they did well. And they didn't realize that the world had changed, because one of the ways that it changed is that Walmart had entered into relationships with their vendors, where the vendors would have an IT connection to every Walmart store, and the vendors would manage the inventories for Walmart. And so, if you're selling, crock pots, the crock pot manufacturer would know how many crock pots are being sold in Arkansas or in Montana or wherever it may be. And so when they reached a certain level, they'd be sending more crock pots to them. And this hosiery mill didn't realize that their world had changed, and that they really need to be an IT business instead of a hosiery business. And they ended up having to close the doors. And so I've seen what you're talking about in three dimensions, and it's so let me ask you this question about the mindset of people that want to hold on to the past because it has value for them. And I mean, this is a subject one of the topics in your book. So talk a little bit about what's going on there.
So I mean, for Arlen, for the main character, his family and this little rural world that he has, it's the central part of his identity. I mean, this is certainly a pre-TV age. There's radio. Radio changed a lot. It very much kind of opened up broader horizons for people, for better or for worse. But if you don't have electricity in your house, you don't necessarily have a radio. And so your world is much smaller. You have less to compare to. You know what you know, and whether it's by nature or whether it's by nurture, this is what he's inclined to, and he loves how he grew up, and he wants to continue that. He's not what we would stereotypically think of as, the young man who has itchy feet, wants to go out and travel the world, and then realizes what he left behind. He wants to come back, and
He's not
and
he's not George Bailey of It's a Wonderful Life.
no, he's not, I mean, and again, even in the Southern context, you listen to a lot of old Southern country songs, bluegrass songs. They're always talking about how whatever happened to the old home place? Why'd they tear it down? Why we plow in the fields and look for a job in town? You go looking for something else, and you come back and it's gone. He's not like that. He doesn't have any interest in leaving all that behind. But it's really the coming of the Second World War that pulls him away from this. And the complicating factor for him is duty, because his family has always gone to fight in America's wars, and so he has to too, in order to be himself fully within what it means to be a Breckenridge, to be one of his family. But at this point in time, for him to go where the farm is on a very precarious foothold, it could potentially mean the end of the farm. But if he doesn't go, then he's sort of abrogating his responsibility. So it's very complicated for him. Inevitably, eventually, he does end up going, and he has to, in many ways, forget the world that the rural world that he left behind. He has to forget his old self in order to get through that terrible crucible of war. And then the question is, can he come back? Will he ever make it back? And then when he does, is he going to be forgiven for everything he did? Are people going to recognize what he did?
Yeah.
And is he going to be able to go back to living in that old way? So that's kind of the broad arc of the story. I won't go into too many details because I do want people to read the book, but I won't spoil that much more for you.
Well, I knew the book I knew it was going to be a good story, because I know you. But what surprised me was how good your characterizations of these characters was. I mean, they were their own character. They don't look like anybody else. And I applaud you for that, because I'm certain that that's the hardest part of writing a novel, is to get the characters right. These are not cardboard cutouts, like you find in, a dime novel type of thing.
That was probably one of the things that took so many drafts. The structure of the novel came very early. The action was written very early, but it's really fleshing out who these people are. And for me, it was a little bit more of a challenge, because obviously you're always learning to write. No matter how much you've written, how many books you've written, you're always learning to write.
Very true.
And so I was learning to write people when, by training in college, really I was trained more as a historian. Faulkner said that he was a failed poet who became a novelist. Maybe I'm a failed historian who became a novelist. So I'm a little bit more. I was a little bit more used to writing in a detached manner. So it's no problem getting the historical scene accurate and getting certain details accurate, but really getting the dynamic of people was an an enormous adaptation tool. And now that's very much the way I'm used to thinking and writing. So much so that I think if somebody asked me to sit down and write a conventional history of something, I don't think I could go back, because I'm not used to
Right.
approaching language in that way.
So let me ask you this question, and I'm basing this on a quote by Faulkner from Light in August, and I'll say it slowly because I want people to hear this. Memory believes before knowing remembers, believes longer than recollects, longer than knowing even wonders. What to you is the relationship between our memory of the past and the past as it was?
So I will not counter that, but I will supplement that with something that I wrote about Arlen in the book, which is that I said that he remembered what others remembered. So maybe there's some ambiguity there. Is he others remembered and they recounted it to him, or is there something deeper, something in the blood that passes down certain memories? Because you have an instinct for certain things, and certain things to be true, and then someone comes along, maybe from your own family or someone from a similar background, and they tell you something which is a fact, and you say, I knew that was true. And so it could be really either one of those. I think, and I think that people have always kind of known. I think anyone who's in touch with their basic humanity knows that that's the case. And I think even maybe at a scientific level, we're discovering more of that. As more and more research is done into epigenetics, we're discovering how much just mere experience imprints itself upon our genetics. And so there's no telling what repeated experience of a given place, of a given way of life, et cetera, over multiple generations will do to each successive generation in terms of shaping its instinct and its outlook towards them.
So you're saying then that our memory, our recollection of the past is not just something in our heads, but it's something that's embodied in us, that we have a particular embodied reaction to the things that we learned in some manner through some people, and that embodied response is really a reflection of our connection to past generations. I mean, I certainly see that in my own experience.
It very much so. It doesn't mean that it's always accurate, because I'm sure we've all also had cases where we felt like we knew something was true, and then again, someone brought the fact up, and it disproved what we had originally thought. Mm-hmm. So maybe, but again, there could be also that itself is also a connection to the past, because maybe there was an inclination by those who went before us to want to remember something differently, to cover up some sort of old wound, old trauma, and to remember it in a different way. Romanticizing it.
So is this book then a way of revealing your own embodied memory?
In some sense, and it does deal with that. I mean, it deals with.
I mean, another way of saying it is there an aspect of this which is autobiographical?
No, I wouldn't say it's autobiographical. I mean, I'm not a farmer by any stretch of the imagination. But and I suppose every writer puts things from their own experience into it. But it really came out of just close study of people, particularly of this specific time and place, right? This book being North Carolina, 1940s, and how people were in that time and place, but also the fact that it's not that different from people in other parts of the world, and their experience of time and place and change. I think it's particularly relevant because sort of what Arlen is going through at that point in his history, which for most Americans is, almost time out of mind at this point. I mean, most Americans they don't even know who our allies were in the Second World War. Most people can't even pick 1945 as when the Second World War was over. So it's ancient history for us, but for other peoples around the world, it's not. I mean, they're undergoing very similar things. I can remember I was traveling. I was in Laos. I was in the far north of Laos, like the last city before you get up to the Chinese border. And I mean, ramshackle town. I mean, it is very, very poor, even though it's considered a city. And I needed to change some money. How am I going to change some money in this town? Walking around. All of a sudden, I found a branch of the Lao Commerce Bank. Pretty sure that's what it was. And brand spanking new facility. And it's got glass doors and everything like that. What is going on? But, well, I guess I can change my money here. Go inside, and it's like stepping into a different world. I mean, and I can remember stepping in, and I can just remember how gritty my feet, which are just, my shoes were just caked in dirt, dust, and mud, and I could just feel them scratching on the terrazzo floor, which is just brand new and shiny. And they pretty much understood what I wanted to do, and they made me wait while they were getting money ready. And they had, English Premier League soccer up in the corner. What an odd contrast. And then they brought in this family, and peasant family, and they sat them down and went through all the pleasantries and everything like that. And it was clear that they were setting up this family a bank account. And I thought to myself, this is exactly what would have gone on 100 years ago in my own country with my own people. And so it's the same process at work. In some sense, I do think that what America, the American way of life, if you will, this sort of globalized paradigm that we have, whatever America is doing to the rest of the world, it did to its own people first. And that is really what I would hope that maybe people from other cultures, if they read this book, would understand. That it's not necessarily all Americans being in the way that is seen on TV. That there is a whole side to America, which is, at this point, more or less lost from contemporary memory. And so in some ways, that's one reason why I wanted to write the book, to help us remember this change that we went through, what we once were, and this very moment of transition from the way we were into the way we are now. Because that's an experience which I think is increasingly becoming universal.
I mean, you and I have talked regularly, along with your brother, regularly about many of these topics, and in particular about history, and how people in our time really have no concept of history, and because everything is oriented around the present moment. You live in the present moment, and whatever is in the past, that's gone, and there is no future either. mean, we talked about the lack of innovation, the lack of even with entrepreneurs popping up all over the place, it's still excuse me, there's still a situation where people do not see beyond the present moment, fulfilling their desires, meeting their what they perceive as their needs, taking care of the opportunities, and living in the moment. And it's an interesting thing, and what I see in your story is a young man who sees that moment isn't for him, and that becomes a very difficult pill to swallow. Um, and I've known people. I mean, I've known people like this, and um, so it's certainly an interesting um, question for us to raise, which is, what is the history? And I think it's sorry, I'm rambling here, but I think it comes back to what is the history of your family, and if you can capture that, and for a lot of people, that right now is captured in discovering their DNA and where they're from and who they're related to, and um, someone told me the other day that we're probably related to some people out in the Midwest, because I forget why they said so, but they said that their DNA was showed that there were people down in North Carolina that they were with the same name that they were related to. Well, I've never had my DNA tested, so I don't know. But that I think that that's an avenue that some people, if they were to take that avenue, would discover their family and discover their family history in such a way that it would explain to them why they're in the position that they're in, explain why they have the certain values that they have. I mean, my father, your grandfather, laughed at us a lot, claiming that we were ancestry worshiping, because we were so focused on our family's history. And and I know that, and you know this, that history is something that's not set in stone. It's a very malleable perception of reality, and we keep learning new things, and but what it does is it links us to people in the past that I think are important for us. When I went to Africa 2.5 years ago, I was surprised when they were calling me Imze. Imze meaning a wise old man. Not that I'm an old man or anything like that, but that they were honoring me, that they honored my generation, not because it was my generation, but because that the part of that culture is that we honor those who have gone before us. And and I realized that we don't do that here. And it's not because we have some kind of distaste for people who are older. I think it's just because we live so much in the present, and so we want to claim whatever we can from the present. And that loss of history, I think, has a psychic effect upon us, which is detrimental to living a life of fulfillment and flourishing.
Yes, I very much agree. The past few days, this past week, I've been reading from um, heretical essays on the philosophy of history by Jan Patočka, who was a Czech philosopher. Um, he dealt with phenomenology and Plato. He was actually arrested by the Czechoslovak secret police in 1977. He was one of the signatories of the Charter 77, which Václav Havel was a part of. And he was an old guy. He died actually in interrogation um, by the Czech secret police. Um, in part because he basically argues he wasn't a Christian, but he very much argued for the influence of Christianity and in terms of Western values and he said that there'd been a change from the focus on basically the care of the soul at a civilizational level to a care for things and an acquisition of them. But he makes a very interesting observation that sort of what emerged in the West out of that order was the ability to imbue meaning in the everyday because it has a transcendent quality to it. And if you don't do that, then you end up swinging between the two poles of what he calls work, and on the other hand, the orgiastic. And he talks about work as being unique to humans. Animals don't experience work. Human beings are completely absorbed by work, and yet they also know that in order for their lives to have meaning, they have to be able to get beyond it. And if you're not able to get beyond it in some conscious manner, then your life just becomes a living hell, becomes drudgery, right? And the reaction to that you're either mired in this drudgery and you become numb to it, or in an attempt to get out of it, you end up indulging in the orgiastic, which is probably sort of where our world is trending towards at the moment. But what Patočka talks about is the ability to chart that middle course between the two of them, where accepting the limitations of our daily needs and being able to circumscribe the limits to what we really are as capable of humans, what we're capable of achieving, but finding meaning in that and finding the transcendence in that, which really does require a sense of time, from really understanding from whom you came from, and understanding who's going to come after you and what you're going to pass down to them, really being this conduit. And I think, and I very much agree with that. And I think it also deserves emphasis that place is very much an indicator that a experience of physical place is probably one of the key ways to ground that sense. And the fact that everybody just moves everywhere all over the world, and are just seen as interchangeable economic units to be worn out and disposed of, basically makes that impossible. So I'm not surprised that people don't have a sense of history, and they don't have a sense of time, not only of who came before them and where they came from, but also what's going to come after them, because they're not in any place for that sort of embodied logic to work itself out.
Yeah, I totally see that. So tell us what your plans are for the Breckenridge cycle, as you have called it.
Yeah. So Victory Ruins was originally going to be sort of the final book chronologically in a whole series of books about the same family and follow multiple generations. So I'm going to go back to probably the 1840s, the antebellum era, write a novel about the family then. That sort of sets up the crisis of the war between the states, the Civil War. I'll write a book about that. That's probably going to be 2 volumes. I've got a Reconstruction era novel planned out. And then I've got one planned out for the populist era, so the 1890s, which actually in the South, in North Carolina and in Catawba County in particular, was a very, very, very interesting time. In a lot of ways, one of the last real populist, popular sovereignty revolts against entrenched power and profit in this country. So those have been in the works for a while. The more I go, the more I see potential to add on other books. Of course, obviously, I don't have any fear of the blank page. I got more than I can. As typical, I'm biting off more than I can chew. I'm actually working on a novel now, which is set in North Carolina. It's actually contemporary in setting, and it will be connected to the series. I won't give away too much more than that. You and I have talked about it, and it will be.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. It'll touch on a lot of similar themes, but it'll be different because there's been, over the last 80 years since Victory Ruins takes place, it's been much more of an unraveling, and everything is sort of ratcheted up. It's turned to 11, as they say in Spinal Tap. And there are things that are no longer possible that were possible in the world of Arlen Breckenridge and Victory Ruins.
So last question is, how do people find you if they want to connect with you and get a copy of the book?
Yeah.
Discuss the book with you.
I'm on Twitter. Great way to get a hold of me. I am also on Gab. I've got a website, troopbrenegar.com. You can fill out the contact box and I will get back to you. So those are probably the easiest ways to get a hold of me. And love talking to anybody. I mean, I have lived all over the world and love to meet new people of any background. So please reach out, and look forward to hearing from folks what they think of the book.
Very good. Well, thanks for spending time with us, and I'm proud of you as my son. I'm appreciative of you as a writer, and I wish you every success. And there's much more to come, I'm sure, as we.
Yeah, get your autograph copy now, because it'll be worth something someday.
I certainly hope so. Well, thank you, Troop, and
all right, thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye. I'm grateful for having the opportunity to talk with Troop today, and I hope it was beneficial to you. If you want to find him, you can go to troopbrenegar.com. That's TROOPBRENEGAR.com. And there you can find a link to where you can find the book, but also to his other social media connections. He would welcome your conversation, and I'm sure that you would also benefit from getting to know him. Coming in January, we will have a special launch for the Eddy Network. I hope that you will keep your eyes and ears open for that. Right now, we will be publishing on Substack and at YouTube, but in the new year, we'll add other venues where my podcast will be available. So, and if you have someone that you think I should interview, please get in touch with me, connect us together, introduce us to one another, because I am interested in interviewing people that I don't know. And I'm interested in interviewing people that are unique and interesting, and who may not have had any real public exposure. And in particular, people who have had a real career or doing real service to their local communities. So all of those things are people that are interested in, I'm interested in, and I believe that you would be too. So if you have someone that you think I ought to be talking to, be in touch with me at ed@brenegar.com, and we'll talk about how we can arrange for an interview with the person that you think I should get to know. I thank you very much. I wish you well as the holidays approach, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.